Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Growthwell podcast, where we explore the art of balancing professional growth and personal well-being. I'm your host, Josh Byrd. Thank you again for being with us. Thank you to our partners at Market Scale for helping making this happen. I've got a fantastic guest for you today. I'm so excited for you to hear from Brendan Tolleson. He is married. He's got 3 kids, full household ranging from 5 to 10 years old. For those of you parents in our listenership, you know how those years are. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of a company called RevPartners, which does outsourced rev ops here in Atlanta. They're really good. I've had the pleasure of working with them. But you know, he's got an entire history of working with Atlanta-based VC-backed companies, starting as an SDR, which, if you don't know, is the lowest man on the totem pole. All due respect to all the people in the SDR world. Keep doing it. Our businesses couldn't survive without you, and we love you. But he worked his way all the way up to CEO and co-founder of RevPartners. So without further ado, welcome, Brendan.
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me. Sorry, the mute button was not working for me. You might be the first person that's ever said my last name correctly. So kudos to you for getting that right.
Awesome. I'm glad we could start this out on the right foot. So, well, tell me a little bit about you. Of course, I know about you a bit from working together, but, you know, for our audience, you know, give us a quick, you know, overview of who you are, what you do, how you got there.
Well, you had such a kind introduction. So I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, was born and raised here. I love this place. This is very much home for me. As you mentioned, I do have 3 children, so from 10 to 5. Married to my wife. We've been married for, 12 years now. But that's the family side. From a work perspective, as you mentioned, have been working in the Atlanta community for a while now, both on the VC back side, but now had the pleasure and privilege of building a company, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But that's a little bit about me. But yeah, born and raised and love this town and this community, and excited to get back.
It's a good place to be. So before we get into, you know, building RevPartners a little bit, what is your why? You know, I find that the most successful people we talk to have a purpose for getting out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, that's a loaded. That's not necessarily
very much so. Very much so.
You know, I think I'll answer it. There's a lot of ways to answer that. I think for me, it's you know, it kind of, we have as our purpose statement, RP, and so it's really means a lot to me. And so I think the why for us is, I think you mentioned like turning the lights on or being a light for RP, and what's important to me is we have a statement which is unlocking latent potential for human flourishing. So it's really helping people flourish. And for us, when we say latent by definition is unknown. So what we love to do, what I love to do, is empower people and help them see what they don't see in themselves. And if I can help bridge that gap, to me, that's success. And that's what gets me excited and motivates me.
That's awesome. So somehow that led you to start RevPartners. Talk a little bit about that experience. It was in COVID, I believe you said, and you know, that was a blur of years for all of us. So what crazy idea made you start a business in the middle of COVID?
Well, it's not a romantic story by any means. As we just talked about with COVID, I had been serving as effectively a CRO at a tech-enabled services company. And when COVID hit back in March of, what was that? Keep me honest, Josh, I think it's 2020. 3rd week of March, the world shuts down. CEO calls me and says, I have to let you go. And which I know a lot of people experience that. But that was my world. And so I get called that I've lost my job. The same week, I get a tuition bill for my daughter, my oldest. And so it's like, what the heck do you do? So I have a mortgage. I have 3 kids. I have now a tuition bill to pay, and I have no job. And so I have no time to wait. However, during COVID, especially at the beginning, it was very hard to find a job. And so it was a lot of phone calls with the same response, which is, hey, we know you, we trust you. But until we know what's going on, it's a no for now, not forever. So I didn't really have time to wait, as we just talked about. That's the origin story of RP, was really out of this really tough, hard situation that I don't want anybody to experience, but that's the world, that's where the place I was in. And so through that, That's where RP was born. There's more to the story, but that's where it starts. So I would say this: it wasn't out of some beautiful idea or, hey, I must do this. Actually, I did have to do that, but it wasn't because I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur and I've always wanted to build a business, and now's the time. It's very much a forcing function than anything else.
Yeah, well, as you know and have experienced, no doubt, being an entrepreneur and starting a business is crazy. Like, it's not for the faint of heart. It's ups, it's downs. There's always more to do than there is time to do it. So I'm curious, what rituals and habits, routines do you have that keep you professionally growing, professionally sane, but also personally healthy, and making sure that you're spending time with your family?
Yeah. Before I answer that, the way you were describing entrepreneurship, I heard it even on a podcast yesterday. Success isn't a straight line, so there are peaks and valleys for sure. So I can definitely relate to that. We try to incorporate some of that into the rhythms and the values of our business to help facilitate what you're describing. So I'm not perfect. I fail every day at this. But some of the things that we've tried to implement that have helped is, like, one of our values is do your best, not your all. And it's this concept that we're human beings, not human doers. And so it's a way to remind ourselves of that principle that you were just describing. And then we have principles that are associated with that serve as an operating system for RP. So an example is that the last Friday of every month, the business is off. We say, do the things you love with the people you love. And so we are more than what we do. And so let's create space for that. So that's an example that we've created. I think for me personally, outside of like company rhythms, I have the same. Gosh, I have a very similar daily routine every day. So for me, like, what I like to do is I take my kids to school every morning. I'll make them breakfast, take them to school, and just to have that time with them.
I love that time. I do it too.
Yeah, so it's just a great opportunity. I mean, they're usually pretty quiet, but even just the habit, I think, will pay off over time. So I think with kids, is at least what I've been encouraged to think about is the investments you make now will pay off later. And so I'm gonna believe that to be true.
I believe it too.
So that's one thing that I do. I take a walk every single day. I found that to be I never used to do that. And so that's been a kind of a new discipline for me, to just get outside, and I'll take calls or just walk, listen to podcasts, whatever it may be. But that has been I've gotten pretty religious about that because it helps me so much to have that space. I also have, I have time for reading or reflection, depending on, who our listeners are. For me, that's what I call quiet time for me to read the Bible, pray, those type of disciplines. And then every night, I kind of the same thing, where shut down from 5:30 to 7:30. And so try to make a very concerted effort to have dinner with the kids, have that time with our family, play, put them to bed. And then, after that, it's time with my wife. And if I need to work, I need to work. But those are just some of the rhythms that we've decided to put in place.
I love that. I'm curious, how long is your walk, and do you take it at the same time every day?
It's 3 miles, and it's not the same time every day. I'm not that rigid, but I just figure out what either if I have an open window or if I just can take some calls. Because if I'm on like Zoom from 8:30 to 5:30, I'm wiped. So I need to have some breaks with phone calls.
So you look at your day and you just say, that's my spot to take my walk. That's awesome. I've recently started taking little walks, not 3 miles, but I am pretty religious about getting an intense exercise in several times a week. And so I'm curious, have you always been that disciplined? You clearly baked it into RevPartners. That's one of the things that I love about RevPartners is how mission oriented you are, and how much you take care of your people and you value them. But is that how you were born, or is that something you learned somewhere along the way?
Well, I'm glad you've experienced that from our company. I mean, we stole this from Chick-fil-A, but they have a phrase that cared for people care for people. And so for us, if I care for our peers, then that will be experienced by our customers. And so that is a big part of it. So I'm glad that you can attest to that. Have I always been that rigid around disciplines? No. is the short answer. And if you ask a lot of people that I work with, they probably tell you I'm not that disciplined. So I would say that it is a result of hiring people that, for me, what I've experienced is if I hire the right people who are not only a good fit in terms of like value alignment, but also in terms of like skill set. I mean, I know it's a really feels like not a great answer, or at least a very vanilla answer. But for me, that's what's helped is I'm not operationally inclined. And so I have a COO, for example, we have delivery folks, and that really make up a lot of those gaps for me. And in fact, you asked about, they would probably prefer that my walk was the same time every day. And they probably get very annoyed when I take a walk. But like, it's that balance that I think allows us to be successful. But those things have really matured over time to say, hey, these things are really that important, and I'm going to make space for them, because if I don't, it's going to impact others. And so that's really what I've realized is like, if I don't do these things, it's not just me that gets impacted. I have influence on a lot of people now that I need to make sure that I'm serving them well.
Yeah, it takes so much intentionality, and it takes courage to be that intentional. So bravo for you for, carving out that time for yourself, and also making sure that your teams have that time as well. I'm curious, as the CEO and founder, you've got people pulling on you and all the time, and you're very service oriented. And so to me, that's a recipe for getting out of balance pretty quickly. At least at times when I've been in a leadership position with a lot of people pulling on me, and I love to serve, I get out of balance quickly. So I'm curious, do you have, and the thing is, I don't actually realize sometimes that I'm out of balance. And so I'm curious, do you have people or systems in your life or anything that kind of helps you sound the alarm that, hey, something's a bit off and Brendan needs to take a walk or needs to take a vacation or whatever it is? How have you put those things around you to help you on this journey?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think if I'm left to my own devices, I can. It's usually a dangerous thing. So there's some guardrails that I created with my calendar, like we already talked about, with like, hey, these are like the morning routine and the evening routines. The short answer is my wife is a really good, not necessarily a resource, but good partner is probably a better word. Who she's able to speak in very, very thoughtfully might be the right word. But I think, look, there's a phrase: you can either be impressive or you can be known, but you can't be both. And for me, it's like I would my natural desire is I want to be impressive, but like truly what I do desire is connection. And so I want to be known. And so inviting people into that space where they can say, hey, receive that information of this doesn't look right, or there seems to be a disconnect here. And where I don't want to lack integrity is the things that I truly care about. Like work, what happens with work will happen, but like with my family and my friends, having that type of a resource is the wrong word, but having those relationships is so important to me, and that can actually speak into that. So I think that's an act of submission, which is a really polarizing word in this day and age, but like submitting that to people that you trust and saying, hey, speak into my life. What are you seeing that I don't see? Because I want to make sure that I'm consistent between my words and my actions.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And one, just a quick praise for you that I hadn't planned on, but one of the things that I really was drawn to you about as a leader when we first met is we first met over a problem that one of my clients was having, and instead of dealing with somebody on your team that's probably very capable and everything, you said, hey, I want to personally step in and acknowledge that there have been some mistakes made, and I'm committed to helping us work through those. And just that ownership of, like, in this case, it was an account that you were servicing that was off balance, but your willingness to not make excuses, not put up walls, and actually say, hey, yeah, we made some mistakes. Let's fix them. Let's move forward. I think that's really healthy. And so I love your disposition on that. I'm curious, that's one example of curveballs thrown. And I'm sure you get a lot of them all day, every day. If you get a bunch of curveballs, because life is life and it throws them, what do you do to bring yourself back into balance? Do you have a go-to reset button? You're old enough to remember Nintendo. We had to hit the reset button a bunch of times. What's your reset button?
I haven't thought about that in a very long time, so I appreciate the reference. It also brings back some PTSD because my dad one time got hedge clippers and came down and cut the controller to my Nintendo. So
what did that's another story. I'm curious off camera what you did to deserve that. But
I actually didn't deserve it. It was my brother, but I got blamed for it. And my dad, instead of seeking to understand, decided to just take matters in his own hands. Anyway, that's probably some counseling there for you. I think it'd be interesting to define what balance truly means. But
sure.
For me, it's it happens all the time, candidly. We talk about entrepreneurship as ups and downs. Like it isn't a straight line, as we discussed, and so there's a lot of downs. And even as you and I were talking about in the pre-show, like January and February are really hard for the business. And it's like, what do you do in those moments? Who do you talk to? What do you remind yourself of? So I think there's an element of there's counsel that I seek depending on the topic. If it's on the business side, then we have advisors that I'm able to get their perspective on. I do seek the input of my peers. When I say peers is the wrong word, but like my leadership team as it relates to, hey, what are you seeing that I'm not seeing? So for me, it's asking a lot of questions. And so making sure that I have a perspective that they don't have so that I can learn. And so I think there's that posture of like, I don't know it all. And so I need to know what they're seeing that I don't know so that I can make the right decisions. So there's that element. I think from a personal element, it's like we talk about creating space for walking, but there's also, for me, there's a lot of time for not a lot of time, but trying to create time for reflection and understanding, hey, what's going on? How am I doing? Often, it's really hard for me sometimes to connect the head to the heart. And so if I can create some space to say like, how am I truly feeling? And what am I, I'm reacting in a certain way, but what do those reactions reflect about what's going on in my heart? And so that I can know, hey, is this out of fear that I'm responding this way? There are a lot of emotions, but for guys, at least for me especially, like I can probably name 3, but I can't name all like 90 of the emotions.
Right.
But that's a lot of it, like, hey, what's going on here? And I think there's, like, we mentioned submission before. Then I'd say like submission for me, like I talk a lot about the team, open hands, like closed fists. And so for me, that's submitting that to, for me, when you talk about balance, for me, that's like ultimately this is me speaking personally. So spiritually, like, the Lord's in control. I'm not. Yeah. And so like I can release that and say this is not a burden that I should carry. So that's generally the process that I go through.
That's awesome. I find that release is so important. And for me, I have one that's very calm and one that's very aggressive. The calm one is write down my thoughts and try to get it all out on paper. The other one is go for a really intense bike ride or run and just beat it out of myself. They both work for different things, but it's good that you have your own mental reset button. So for our listeners, what advice do you give or would you give, entrepreneurs, people who are growing in their careers, and they feel pulled all the time because there's always something to do, right? But they know that they want to be healthy, right? And whether that's their own physical health or spending time with family or whatever it is, you've given us a lot of your strategies, but just if somebody was like, how do I get to where you are without losing my soul? What would you tell them?
I think given the question, like the way you phrase it at the end, like they actually care about that. So
yeah, they have to care first.
I would say like, what's important to you? And it goes back to your first question around like your why and purpose. And so I think it's really helped me understand what that is for you, because if that's truly what you say is important, then that's going to reflect the actions that you take. So I usually wouldn't start there because it's like, I'm not going to giving advice to somebody that's not either receptive to it or it's not relevant to them. I think it's a little bit difficult. I would usually connect it to the why or their purpose. to then say, they could say, well, hey, I want to be a great father.
Right.
Okay, that's what you want to. And if it's an entrepreneur that's on, let's just say you're on the road Monday through Friday, and you're working all day, like all night. It's like, well, hey, those actions don't really reflect what you just told me. And so, or I want to be a great husband, or whatever it may be. It's just like, okay, are there consistencies here or inconsistencies, and how can I speak into that? And so, I think that's generally how I would try to, there's this idea of there's a balance of grace and truth, and so there's challenge, but there's also care and support in the midst of that. And so, coming alongside that person and saying, hey, I hear what you want, but I see a disconnect there. That's generally, or hey, you're actually doing exactly what you said. Because some people may say, like, my purpose is to make money, and that's all I care about. And it's like, well, hey, that's more to you, more power to you, and like those are the decisions you're making. That's generally not the path that I have chosen to take, and so that's. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's normally how I would interact with that advice.
It does, because our listeners, especially if they're 20 minutes deep in this podcast, are not the people that are just in it to make money. I think that we all need to make money. I often say, look, if we didn't need to work, we'd all be propped up on a beach somewhere, or mountains or wherever. But, there is a way to work and make money and be successful in order to fuel your life and pour into others, and outside of your family. You're doing a lot for your community at RevPartners, and y'all even have an event coming up soon. By the time this podcast releases, I think it will have just happened. But that's another way that you're building that community and helping people. So I think that's really awesome. What's next for you on the horizon for your growth journey? Is there anything you're exploring, excited about, hoping to try? As as of this recording, we're heading into summertime here in Atlanta. So what's on your mind?
I'll answer a few different ways. I mean, from a business perspective, we've thought a lot about encouraging ourselves to think not in like 90-day increments for like OKRs or objectives or whatever your framework is, EOS or rocks. So, I mean, we kind of say, hey, let's actually think further out, where we want to be in 10 years. And that's been a really healthy exercise to start processing through where are we taking the business over that time. So I'll answer that question that way. So we want to become the global services provider for the CRO and HubSpot. So right now we're about a $10 million business. We want to be a $100 million business, and we think that's very much possible. And there's a lot that goes into that. But that's where that's where my head's going in terms of the business side, what I'm getting really excited about and what I've been thinking about. From a personal perspective, it's interesting what you said, and I'm even challenging myself, is I don't know who, like, the idea of being really successful in business and really successful in at home, like, I don't know how to do that well.
I don't either. That's why this podcast exists. We're all exploring it together, and hopefully we can all learn together, right?
Yeah, and I think that I think it's a very narrow and hard path.
Yes,
and I think it's worth striving for. I'm learning how to do it. So to your point of like entrepreneurship, the same thing applies to that whole pursuit. It's like, I have not figured that out. And so these are some of the things that I've tried, and some have been successful, some aren't. But like, there have been things that have been very hard. And so I'm trying to figure out what is the right pace by which to do that. And if you know people, I would love to talk to them, because it is, or maybe I'll just have to listen to this podcast. That's probably the best way to do it, because that is very much on my mind to answer your question of, okay, I have this desire to build this $100 million business, but I also have this desire to be a great father and a great husband. Yeah. And so, can you do both of those well? And if so, how?
I believe you can. That's the reason for this show. And I don't know that there's any one right or wrong answer. It's one of those things where I say almost every show, but balance is actually, the opposition of two forces. And, if you're sitting on a balance beam or a balance bar, or a ball or whatever, you're constantly making movements and making iterations to your posture and your stance and everything like that. And I think that's part of it. That's part of the journey, right? Because balance is not stillness. And so I think it's constantly learning how to readjust, but getting better and better so that your adjustments are more micro and micro versus, when you first learn to balance, you're like a baby deer, and your legs and your arms are all over the place. And so I think you just get better and better at time, but I don't think you ever actually reach a state as much as it's closer and closer to the end goal, well, man.
I was gonna say, I heard Arthur Brooks, who wrote a few books that I can't remember the names of the books right now, but he talks about happiness, or like being happy.
Yeah.
And basically that, like, it's a journey. It's the point is, it's like you never reach it, but it's a direction.
Yes.
It's not a destination, it's a direction. And so I think it's kind of how you're describing that.
Have you read, I think it's From Strength to Strength?
Yeah.
I read that one recently. I think that may be the one that he talks about that, or one of the ones. But yeah, it really is. And it's like, how do you lean into that and be the best you can be, to serve your mission and your purpose, So thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We will put all of Brendan and RevPartners links in the show notes so that you can find them, reach out to them. If you need outsourced RevOps, they're the go-to guys and girls. So thanks so much, Brendan. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the time, the opportunity. I look forward to listening to other speakers so that I can get myself educated on how to find balance. So thanks a lot.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Thank you for listening once again. Please share this with others, do all the things that you're supposed to on all the platforms. Look, we are just trying to spread light and help others learn how to grow professionally and personally in a healthy way. Thanks as always to Market Scale for putting on this podcast. And until next time, I hope you go out into your week, into your life, and pursue growth well.